Inception of a daredevil. Picture this. Paris, 1670. A 12-year-old girl in boys' clothing steps into the fencing circle. Around her, grown men with decades of training. She raises her blade. The whispers stop, because what happens next shouldn't be possible. This child, this daughter of a court secretary, is about to disarm 3 adult swordsmen in succession. Her father watches from the shadows, proud and terrified, because he knows what he's created: a weapon, a scandal, a revolution wrapped in silk and steel. Before we dive into this wild story, get comfortable, dim the lights, let your mind wander to 17th century France. If you're new here, welcome to Hearts and History, where we explore love stories that changed the world. Hit subscribe if you want more historical tales to fall asleep to, and drop a comment. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? I love hearing from our global community of history lovers settling in for sleep. Paris, dawn, 1670. The city's waking up, but the Louvre's already buzzing with activity. Courtiers rushing between meetings, pages practicing their swordwork, and in the training yards, Gaston d'Aubigny is doing something no father would dare. He's teaching his daughter to fence, not gentle, ladylike movements. Real fencing, the kind that draws blood. Julie's maybe 8 years old, gripping a practice sword that's almost as tall as she is. Her father circles her like a hawk, correcting her stance. See, Gaston wasn't your typical court secretary. Sure, he worked for Louis de Lorraine Guise, the Comte d'Armagnac, master of the horse to King Louis XIV. But Gaston's real expertise? Violence. He trained the court pages in swordplay by day, then disappeared into Paris's gambling dens by night. Brothels, taverns, back-alley duels. The man knew every dangerous corner of the city, and he figured his daughter needed the same education. Boys got swords and books. Julie would get both too. Picture little Julie in the practice yards, wearing boys' clothes because dresses don't work with lunging and parrying. The other students, future courtiers, sons of nobility, they probably thought it was cute at first. A girl playing with swords, that lasted maybe a week, because Julie wasn't playing. While they stumbled through basic forms, she absorbed everything: footwork, blade angles, the precise moment to strike. Her father watched her natural talent emerge and pushed harder. Again, he'd say, faster. By age 12, something extraordinary happened. Julie could beat grown men, not occasionally, regularly. Picture the scene, spectators gathering, whispering behind fans and gloved hands. A child, barely an adolescent, stepping into the circle with seasoned swordsmen, the metallic ring of blades meeting. Then silence as Julie's opponent staggers back, disarmed. Again, the tremor in those hushed whispers, because this wasn't supposed to happen. Girls weren't supposed to be deadly, but Julie was rewriting the rules with every perfect thrust. But swordplay wasn't her only education. Gaston made sure Julie learned everything the court pages did. Dancing, because nobles needed grace. Reading and writing, because ignorance was weakness. Drawing, music, academic subjects typically forbidden to women. She absorbed it all, mornings with tutors, afternoons with swords. While other girls her age embroidered and practiced curtsies, Julie was mastering arts that could kill you or make you rich. Her father was building something unprecedented, a woman who couldn't be controlled. Then came the complication that changed everything. The Comte d'Armagnac, her father's employer, the one man Gaston couldn't challenge to a duel, noticed Julie. She was maybe 14, already stunning, already dangerous, and de d'Armagnac decided he wanted her. Picture the impossible position this created. Gaston had spent years making his daughter untouchable, but now his own boss was reaching for her. What do you do when your protector becomes the threat? Julie found her answer in the oldest game of all, seduction. So Julie became d'Armagnac's mistress, 14 years old, already playing political chess that would challenge grown women. She'd found the one loophole in her father's protection, become the lover of the man her father served. Brilliant, dangerous, typical Julie. But d'Armagnac soon discovered something every man in her life would learn. Julie d'Aubigny was too hot to handle, too smart, too skilled, too independent. His solution? Marriage. Get her off his hands and onto someone else's problem list. Enter Sieur de Maupin of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a mild-mannered clerk, respectable, boring, completely outmatched. D'Armagnac arranged the marriage like he was solving a political crisis, which, honestly, he was. In 1687, Julie became Madame de Maupin. The ceremony probably lasted longer than the honeymoon. Some accounts say the morning after the wedding, her new husband was dispatched to the south of France for an administrative position. Convenient. Julie got his name, his money, his ring. He got distance from the hurricane he'd married. And so Julie d'Aubigny transformed into Madame de Maupin, at least on paper. In reality, she was still the sword-wielding, rule-breaking force her father had created. Marriage was just another costume to wear, when convenient. She had a title now: money, freedom from her father's authority, and d'Armagnac's demands. Most importantly, she had protection from society's expectations. Married women had certain liberties. Julie intended to explore every single one. The girl who'd conquered men with steel was about to conquer the world. The Fugitive's Song. Paris, 1687. Seurat's sword finds its mark. The assistant fencing master watches his opponent collapse, blood spreading across the cobblestones. One fatal thrust, one moment of steel meeting flesh, and suddenly everything changes. The Lieutenant General of Police will come looking. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie doesn't forgive illegal duels. Seurat knows this. Julie knows this. They have maybe hours before the law finds them. So they run, two fugitives fleeing into the French countryside, leaving behind everything they've ever known. Picture them on the dusty roads heading south. Julie in her travelling clothes, sword at her hip, hair tied back, Seurat beside her, still processing what he's done. They can't go back to Paris, can't return to their old lives. The comfortable world of the royal court, the familiar fencing halls, all of it's gone now. But here's the thing about Julie. She's never been one to waste time on regret. They need money, they need to eat, and she has an idea. A dangerous, brilliant, completely audacious idea. They become travelling performers. Think about that for a second. Most people fleeing the law try to stay invisible. Not Julie. She decides their best disguise is the spotlight. At local fairs and taverns, they set up their act. Seurat helps with the demonstrations. But Julie, she's the star. Picture her brandishing her sword, voice carrying across the crowd, drawing people in with a song. Then the challenge: who wants to face her blade? The audacity of it. A woman in public challenging men to duels. One by one they step forward. Local toughs, overconfident farmers, men who think they know how to handle a sword. And one by one she defeats them. But here's what makes it brilliant. She's singing the entire time, mocking them, praising herself, turning their humiliation into entertainment. The crowd loves it. They've never seen anything like this. A woman who fights like a master swordsman and has the voice of an angel. Word spreads, crowds grow larger, and Julie starts becoming someone new. Le Maupin. That's what they start calling her. Not Julie d'Aubigny, not Madame de Maupin. Le Maupin, like she's become something mythical, something more than human. And maybe she has, because this isn't just about surviving anymore. This is about transformation. Every performance, every duel, every song, she's shedding her old self. The court lady who had to be careful, the woman who had to follow rules. That person is disappearing. In her place, something wild and free is emerging. But not everyone appreciates the show. At one tavern, A drunk heckler gets loud, really loud. He's slurring his words, stumbling around, pointing at Julie with a tankard of ale. "That's no woman," he shouts. "No woman fights like that. Must be a man dressed up." The crowd goes quiet. You can feel the tension. Some people nod. Maybe he has a point. Julie looks at him, looks at the crowd. And then, well, this is where things get interesting. Her response is direct. Julie doesn't argue with words, doesn't try to convince anyone. Instead, she grabs the hem of her shirt and tears it off, right there in front of everyone, providing what you might call conclusive evidence. The drunk heckler's jaw drops, the crowd erupts. Some people cheer, some look away, but nobody questions her gender again. This is pure Julie. When faced with doubt, she doesn't explain herself. She proves herself, boldly, completely, without shame or hesitation. The incident becomes legend. Stories spread faster than they can travel. In every new town, people have heard about the woman who silenced skeptics by baring her chest, about Maupin and her incredible sword work, about her voice that can make you cry or laugh or fall in love. She's becoming famous, actually famous, not court famous, where a handful of nobles know your name, real famous, where common people in distant villages have heard of you. And with fame comes something else. Confidence. The kind that can't be taught or bought. Julie's always been bold, but this is different. This is the confidence of someone who's tested herself against the world, and won. Every crowd that cheers for her, every challenger she defeats, every song that brings people to tears, it's all building something inside her, a sense of her own power, her own worth, independent of what anyone else thinks. Saran watches this transformation with fascination. The woman fleeing Paris beside him was remarkable, but this person commanding crowds, defeating challengers, turning skepticism into adoration. She's something else entirely. He realizes he's not just traveling with a fugitive anymore, he's traveling with a force of nature, someone who doesn't just survive adversity, she transforms it into opportunity, makes it serve her purposes, bends the world to her will through pure audacity. Their journey south continues, but they're not the same people who fled Paris. That frightened pair running from the law. They're gone. In their place, two performers bound by shared danger and mutual respect. Saran, the skilled swordsman finding purpose in their shows, and Julie is becoming La Maupin, the woman whose name will echo through history, who proves that sometimes the best way to hide from your past isn't to disappear, it's to become so brilliant that everyone's looking at your future instead. From celestial sounds to lovers' trials. Marseille, 1688. The old port city smells like fish, salt, and opportunity. Julie and Saran finally arrive after weeks on the road, but here's where their paths split. Saran, he melts into the shadows, disappears into whatever underground network protects wanted men. Julie, though, she's got different plans. She walks straight to Pierre Gautier's opera house. No more dusty taverns, no more sword tricks for drunk farmers. She's ready for real stages, real audiences, and she's about to discover something that'll change everything. Gautier takes one look at this travel-worn girl and almost laughs. Then she opens her mouth to sing. The entire rehearsal room goes silent. Her voice, it's not just beautiful. It's got this raw power that fills every corner of the space. Within weeks, she's performing under her maiden name, Julie d'Aubigny. The audiences are mesmerized. Here's this young woman who moves like a dancer, fights like a soldier, and sings like an angel. But it's not just the crowds watching her. Someone else has caught her eye. Her name was... well, history doesn't tell us her name, just that she was the daughter of a wealthy merchant. Young, beautiful, probably around Julie's age, and completely captivated by this wild opera singer who wore men's clothes off stage and could make grown men weep with her voice. They meet after a performance, maybe backstage, maybe at some social gathering, but the spark between them, immediate, dangerous, the kind of attraction that makes you forget every rule you've ever learned about being careful. What starts as stolen glances becomes secret meetings. Julie would finish her performances, change out of her costume, and slip away to meet her lover. They'd find quiet corners of the city, empty gardens, Julie's rooms above a tavern. This isn't just physical attraction. Julie's completely smitten. For the first time in her life, she's not the one in control. She's falling hard for someone who sees past the scandal, past the sword skills, past the stage persona, just sees Julie, and that terrifies her in the best way. But Marseille's a port town, not Paris. Word travels fast in small circles, and when your daughter starts disappearing after dark, then comes home glowing, questions get asked. The merchant notices his daughter's new jewellery, gifts she can't explain. Her dreamy expressions, the way she hums opera melodies she's never heard before. Then someone spots them together. Two women, walking arm in arm through the olive groves outside town, laughing, kissing, in 17th century Catholic France. This is the kind of scandal that destroys families. The confrontation is brutal. The merchant storms into his daughter's room, demands answers. When she refuses to deny the relationship, he loses it completely, screaming about family honour, about God's judgment, about what the neighbours will say. His daughter stands her ground. She loves Julie. She's not ashamed. She won't end it. So the merchant does what powerful men do when they can't control their women. He removes them from the equation. One morning, his daughter simply disappears. Julie rushes to the house. The servants won't meet her eyes. Convent of the Visit and Dines, Avignon, about 60 miles inland from Marseille. That's where they've sent her, behind stone walls, iron gates, and the moral authority of the Catholic Church. It's not exactly a prison, but it's not exactly freedom either. The merchant figures the nuns will cure his daughter of this unnatural attraction. Prayer, isolation, religious instruction, time to think about her soul instead of other things. But he's made one crucial mistake. He's underestimated exactly what Julie d'Aubigny is willing to do for love. Julie doesn't even hesitate. She quits the opera company, packs her few belongings, and heads for Avignon. But this isn't some romantic rescue fantasy. This requires planning, strategy, the kind of thinking that got her out of Paris alive. She can't exactly storm the convent gates with her sword drawn, so she does something even more audacious. She becomes a postulant, a novice, seeking to take holy orders. Picture this: Julie d'Aubigny, opera star and master duelist, kneeling before the Mother Superior in borrowed religious robes. The disguise works perfectly. The nuns welcome this devout young woman, seeking God's guidance. Julie settles into convent life, morning prayers, afternoon chores, evening meditation, but at night, she finds her lover's cell. They reunite in whispered conversations, stolen touches. For weeks they plan their escape. But convents are designed to keep people in. High walls, locked doors, nuns who notice everything. They need a distraction, something dramatic enough to create chaos. Then an elderly nun dies peacefully in her sleep, and Julie sees her chance. Middle of the night. The convent sleeps peacefully, except for two women moving through the corridors like shadows. They carry the dead nun's body to the merchant's daughter's cell, place it carefully in her bed, arrange the covers. Then Julie does what she does best. She creates a spectacular disaster. Fire spreads through the cell. Then the corridor. Bells ring. Nuns scream. In the smoke and panic, two figures slip through the gardens and over the wall. But the plan has one fatal flaw. Dead bodies don't burn like living ones. Dawn reveals the truth. The charred corpse isn't the merchant's daughter. It's Sister Marguerite, who died 3 days earlier. The authorities pieced together the impossible crime: body theft, arson, kidnapping, fraud, and somehow, impossibly, it all points back to one woman. Julie d'Aubigny is now wanted for crimes that carry the death penalty. The judges can't quite believe a woman could orchestrate such audacity, so they issue the warrant under her married name, Sieur de Maupin. They're going to burn him alive, if they can catch him. A rebirth amidst crossed paths. Julie's escape from Avignon wasn't clean. Word of the convent fire spread faster than she could ride. Every inn, every tavern, whispers followed her. The girl who burned down holy ground for love. The woman dressed as a man who stole a nun's body. But here's what struck me about Julie. She didn't run with shame. She rode with purpose. South through the countryside, her sword at her hip, her voice ready for whatever came next. Because Julie d'Aubigny had learned something important. Sometimes you have to burn bridges to cross them. Picture this. Dusty road outside Villa Perdu. Julie, still dressed in men's clothing, hood pulled low. She's thinking about her next move when, crash, she literally bumps into someone coming around the corner. Not just anyone, the Comte d'Albert, young nobleman, perfectly groomed, probably never had dirt under his fingernails in his life. And he's furious. This stranger just knocked into him like some common peasant. The Comte's hand goes straight to his sword. His voice drips with aristocratic outrage. "You will answer for this insult with your blade, sir." Julie almost laughs. Almost. What d'Albert didn't know, he'd just challenged the most dangerous woman in France to a duel. Julie could have walked away, could have apologized, could have revealed she was a woman, and ended it right there. But where's the fun in that? Instead, she bows like a perfect gentleman. "At your service, monsieur." They find a clearing just outside town. Swords drawn. D'Albert probably thinking this will be over quick. Some travelling nobody trying to look tough. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Julie's father trained her well, very well. The duel lasted maybe 3 minutes. D'Albert was good for a nobleman who fenced for sport. Julie was lethal. She'd been training since she was 12, against men who fought for their lives, not their reputation. She disarmed him twice, just to make a point. Then, when she got bored, her blade found his shoulder, clean through. Not fatal, but definitely memorable. D'Albert hit the ground, bleeding, confused, and completely humiliated. This stranger had just schooled him like he was a child. Julie stood over him, not even breathing hard. "Perhaps next time, monsieur. Look where you're walking." Here's where Julie surprised everyone, including herself. The next morning, she showed up at d'Albert's lodgings. Not to gloat, not to finish the job, to help. She'd brought bandages, wine for cleaning the wound, herbs for infection. The Comte was burning with fever, his shoulder a mess. And this stranger who'd put him there, now playing nursemaid. Julie cleaned the wound, changed his bandages, fed him broth when he was too weak to hold the spoon. For 3 days she barely left his side. D'Albert kept asking why. Julie never really answered. Maybe she didn't know either. By the 4th day, d'Albert was sitting up, colour returning to his cheeks. That's when the real conversation started. Julie finally revealed her identity. Not just her name, her whole story. The Comte d'Armagnac, the marriage to de Maupin, Saran, the convent fire, everything. D'Albert listened, fascinated. Here was someone who'd lived more in 20 years than he had in 30. But here's what bonded them. They'd both loved and lost. Both knew what it meant to have your heart shattered. Both understood that sometimes survival meant reinventing yourself completely. They talked until dawn, sharing their romantic disasters and dreams. Their friendship might have ended there, but fate had other plans. Travelling together toward Poitiers, they stopped at a small inn. The entertainment that night. An old actor named Maréchal, must have been 70, white hair, weathered face, but when he took the stage, magic. His voice filled every corner of that room. After his performance, Julie couldn't help herself. She started singing, softly at first, then stronger, a piece from Lully's latest opera. Marechal stopped mid-drink, turned around slowly, stared at this young person in men's clothes, with the voice of an angel. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "where did you learn to sing like that?" Marechal had spent 50 years in the theatre. He'd worked with the best singers in France, trained voices that graced the Paris Opera. But Julie's voice, different. Raw power mixed with perfect technique, natural emotion that couldn't be taught. He pulled her aside after the performance, eyes bright with excitement. "You have a gift," he told her. "But more than that, you have presence. That thing that makes people stop talking when you enter a room." He'd seen maybe 3 people in his lifetime with that quality. Julie was the 4th, and she was wasting it on travelling exhibitions and tavern crowds. For the next month, Marechal became Julie's unofficial teacher. Every morning, vocal exercises, breathing techniques, stage presence, how to project emotion through song, how to command an audience without saying a word. But mostly, he taught her to believe in her talent. Julie had always known she could sing, but Marechal showed her she could be great. He made her practice the same piece 40 different ways, until she understood that singing wasn't just about hitting notes. It was about telling stories, about making people feel something they'd never felt before, about transformation. What amazed Marechal wasn't just Julie's voice, it was everything else. Her stories, her passion, the way she talked about love and loss and adventure, like they were all part of the same grand performance. She made him remember why he'd fallen in love with theatre in the first place. This young woman who'd burned down convents and won impossible duels and loved without boundaries. She reminded him that art wasn't about technique. It was about living fully, fearlessly, and then sharing that experience with the world. Julie didn't just sing songs, she sang her life, every note authentic, every word true. When they finally parted ways, Julie had gained something precious. 2 friendships that would last her lifetime. D'Albert, who understood her heart. Marechal, who understood her art. Both men who saw past the scandal and the sword to recognize something rare. A woman who refused to be anything less than completely herself. They'd given her confidence, training, and most importantly, belief that her talents deserved a bigger stage. Julie d'Aubigny was ready for Paris, ready for the opera, ready to show the world what she could do. And the world, whether it was ready or not, was about to meet Le Maupin, the pardon and the Paris opera. Picture Julie d'Aubigny in 1690, 17 years old, condemned to burn at the stake for arson, kidnapping, and body snatching, the sentence hanging over her head like a blade. But here's the thing about Julie. She never let fear stop her from living. While most people would be hiding in some remote village, praying nobody recognized them, she's got bigger plans. She wants to sing at the Paris Opera, the most prestigious stage in all of France. Yeah, you heard that right. So how exactly do you go from death row fugitive to opera star? Well, if you're Julie d'Aubigny, you call in some very powerful favours. Remember the Comte d'Armagnac, her father's employer and her former lover, the man who'd once found her too hot to handle? Turns out he still carried a torch for his wild protégé. When Julie reached out from her exile, asking for help, d'Armagnac didn't hesitate. He went straight to the top. King Louis XIV himself. Now imagine this scene at Versailles. The Comte d'Armagnac approaches the Sun King, Louis XIV, the most powerful man in Europe. He's got to explain why His Majesty should pardon a woman who burned down a convent. But d'Armagnac was clever. He didn't focus on Julie's crimes. He talked about her talents, her extraordinary voice, her unique, shall we say, multifaceted persona. Louis XIV was intrigued. A singing, sword-fighting, cross-dressing opera prodigy. This he had to see for himself. The royal pardon came through. Just like that. Julie d'Aubigny was free to return to Paris. But more than that, the king himself had arranged for her audition at the Paris Opera. Think about this for a second. She went from death sentence to royal recommendation in one conversation. That's the kind of pull the Comte d'Armagnac had. And honestly, that's the kind of magnetic personality Julie possessed. Even her scandals somehow worked in her favour. She was too fascinating to execute. Paris, 1690. Julie d'Aubigny walks into the Paris Opera for the first time as a legitimate performer. Not a fugitive, not a wandering street performer, but as someone with royal backing. She's 17 years old, and she's about to debut in Jean-Baptiste Lully's Cadmus et Hermione, playing Pallas Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare. Could there be a more perfect role? A warrior goddess for a woman who'd literally fought her way to this moment. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Opening night, the curtain rises, and Julie d'Aubigny steps onto the stage of the Paris Opera as a goddess, curly auburn hair catching the candlelight. That athletic build, those piercing blue eyes. But then she opens her mouth to sing, and the entire theatre falls silent. Her voice fills every corner of that magnificent space. Rich, powerful, unlike anything they'd ever heard. This wasn't just talent. This was something almost supernatural. The audience knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The applause was thunderous, absolutely thunderous. People were on their feet, shouting bravos, throwing flowers onto the stage. But it wasn't just the volume of her voice that captivated them. It was her presence, her complete command of that stage. She moved like the warrior she actually was, sang like an angel, and somehow made playing a goddess look effortless. In one performance, Julie d'Aubigny had conquered Paris. The reviews the next morning would be absolutely stunning. The newspapers went wild. Critics were struggling to find words grand enough to describe what they'd witnessed. They called her voice divine, her stage presence magnetic, her performance transcendent. But this wasn't just newspaper hype. This was the sophisticated Paris Opera crowd, people who'd seen everything, heard everyone, and they were unanimous. Julie d'Aubigny wasn't just another pretty soprano. She was something completely new, a force of nature who happened to sing like a saint. Then came the review that would make her immortal. Philippe de Courcillon, the Marquis de Dangeau, was the most respected cultural critic in France. His opinion could make or break careers. When he attended Julie's performance, everyone waited breathlessly for his verdict. His words, when they came, were simple but devastating. Hers is the most beautiful voice in the world. Full stop. From the Marquis de Dangeau, that wasn't just praise. That was a royal decree of artistic greatness. Overnight, Julie d'Aubigny became the most famous performer in Paris. Composers started writing roles specifically for her unique vocal range. Audiences packed the opera house whenever her name appeared on the program. Aristocrats competed for invitations to salons where she might sing. And remember, this is the same woman who'd been condemned to death just months earlier. The same woman who'd burned down a convent for love. Now she was Paris royalty. The transformation was absolutely stunning. Julie's resilience had paid off in the most spectacular way possible. From outlaw to opera star, from death sentence to standing ovations. She'd proven that talent, determination, and a little royal intervention could overcome almost anything. But knowing Julie d'Aubigny, this was just the beginning. Because if you think her rise to opera stardom was dramatic, wait until you hear what she did next. The scandals were just getting started. The real adventures were still to come. A scandalous ball and a royal pardon. Picture this. It's 1697. The palace of Philippe d'Orléans, King Louis XIV's younger brother. The most exclusive party in France. Crystal chandeliers, silk gowns, powdered wigs. Everyone who matters is here. The nobility are dancing, gossiping, scheming, standard royal ball stuff. Then Julie d'Aubigny walks in, and she's about to turn this polite gathering into absolute chaos. Because Julie, she never could resist making a scene, especially when there were beautiful women involved. Here's what made jaws drop the moment she entered. Julie's wearing full men's clothing, elaborate coat, breeches, boots, and a fencing sword hanging from her hip. At a royal ball, where weapons weren't exactly dress code, but she looked incredible. Auburn hair perfectly styled, that athletic grace she'd developed from years of sword fighting. She moved through the crowd like she owned the place, which, honestly, she kind of did. When you're the opera's biggest star, rules become suggestions. Then she spotted her. A young noblewoman, gorgeous, probably married to some boring count. Julie made her move. Not subtle flirtation, bold, obvious courtship. She asked the woman to dance, then another dance, and another. The entire ballroom's watching now. This sword-wearing opera star in men's clothing, completely captivating this beautiful aristocrat. The woman's clearly enchanted. Her husband? Probably somewhere having an anxiety attack. But Julie's just getting started. The real shock was still coming, right there, in front of everyone. In front of the royal family. Julie kissed her, full on the mouth, passionately. Dead silence. You could hear a pin drop. This wasn't some quick peck. This was a real kiss, the kind that leaves no doubt about intentions. The ballroom erupted. Whispers, gasps, shocked faces everywhere. Ladies fanning themselves frantically, men choking on their wine. And Julie, she just smiled, like she'd planned this whole thing. Which, knowing Julie, she probably had. 3 men stepped forward immediately, the woman's suitors, absolutely furious. They saw this arrogant young man disrespecting their lady, their honour, their, well, everything. The challengers came rapid fire. "Sir, you have insulted this lady's virtue. I demand satisfaction. Name your seconds." Classic dueling drama. Julie just laughed. She accepted all 3 challenges. For tomorrow. No, right now. Outside in the gardens. The whole party pressed against the windows to watch. This was about to become legendary. The garden duels were swift and brutal. First challenger. Julie disarmed him in under a minute, driving her blade through his shoulder. Second one lasted maybe 2 minutes before she wounded his sword arm. The third guy? He was smart enough to be scared by now. But honor demanded he fight. Julie finished him quickly, a precise thrust to his leg. 3 noblemen lying in the palace gardens, bleeding and groaning. Julie cleaned her sword, straightened her coat, and walked back inside, like nothing had happened. She rejoined the party, calmly took a glass of wine from a servant, smiled at the young woman who'd started this whole mess. The ballroom was electric, everyone pretending to dance while actually staring at this audacious opera star who'd just wounded 3 men. Some were horrified, others secretly thrilled. Because let's be honest, when's the last time a royal ball had actual sword fighting? Julie had given them the scandal of the century, and she wasn't done yet. Then King Louis XIV himself appeared, the Sun King, absolute monarch of France. He approached Julie directly, his face stern. "Mademoiselle de Maupin," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I must remind you that dueling is strictly forbidden in Paris. The penalty is death." Dead silence again. This was it. The king was about to arrest his favourite opera singer. Julie stood perfectly still, meeting his gaze. You could feel the tension radiating through the entire ballroom. But then Philippe d'Orléans, the king's brother, stepped forward. He whispered something in Louis's ear. The king's expression changed. A slight smile appeared. "However," the king announced, "I have been reminded that my decree against dueling applies specifically to men, since Mademoiselle de Maupin is clearly a woman." He paused dramatically. "She is technically exempt from this law." Laughter erupted. Applause. Julie had been pardoned on a technicality. Only she could turn a death sentence into a royal joke. This night became legend immediately. Gossip spread through every salon in Paris within hours. The opera singer who duelled 3 men at a royal ball and got away with it because she was a woman. It perfectly captured everything outrageous about Julie d'Aubigny. Her complete disregard for social rules, her lethal sword skills, her ability to charm even kings into pardoning her most scandalous behaviour. She turned the palace into her personal stage and given a performance nobody would forget. But success has a way of creating new problems. Julie's fame was spreading beyond France. Her voice, her sword skills, her scandals, everyone wanted to see the legendary La Maupin, which meant bigger stages, more attention, more complications. And somewhere in Paris, a woman was about to enter Julie's life who would change everything. The Marquise de Florensac, the most beautiful woman in France, the great love Julie had been searching for without knowing it, casting a spell on the opera's stage. Paris 1702, 5 years since Julie kissed that woman at the royal ball. 5 years of scandals, duels, and standing ovations. The opera world has watched her break every rule and somehow become more beloved for it. Now 2 men are about to change everything. Composer André Campra and librettist Antoine Danchet sit in a smoky tavern, sketching out something unprecedented. An opera written specifically for La Maupin, not adapted for her voice, created for her soul. They call it Tancrede. Set during the Crusades, it tells the story of a Christian knight who falls for Clorinde, a Saracen warrior princess. But here's the brilliant part. Clorinde fights in male armour. She's fierce, she's independent, she switches between feminine grace and masculine power. Sound familiar? Danchet literally wrote La Maupin's real life into the character. Every sword fight she'd won, every scandal she'd survived, every time she'd dressed as a man, it's all there in Clorinde's story. This wasn't just another commission. Campra revolutionized the vocal range specifically for Julie's voice. Remember, most opera heroines were sopranos, hitting those high ethereal notes. But Julie's voice was richer, deeper, more complex. So Campra wrote the first major French opera where the female lead wasn't a soprano. He was literally inventing a new category of opera star. The music matched her personality, powerful, unexpected, impossible to ignore. When other singers tried to perform Clorinde later, it never quite worked the same way. Opening night arrives. The curtain rises on Le Maupin as Clorinde, and Paris holds its breath. She's wearing armour that catches the candlelight, her curly auburn hair spilling over the metal. When she sings, that rich voice fills every corner of the opera house. But it's not just her voice that mesmerises them. It's the way she moves, like she actually knows how to use that sword on her hip. Because she does. Every gesture, every stance. This isn't acting. This is Julie being herself in costume. The audience can't take their eyes off her. Not just because she's beautiful, but because of how she carries herself. That confidence, that slight swagger. It's magnetic. And something interesting starts happening. Women in the audience begin copying her style. The way she wears her hair, the cut of her costumes, even her posture. Le Maupin isn't just performing opera, she's setting fashion trends. Dressmakers start getting requests for Le Maupin sleeves and Clorinde necklines. She's becoming a cultural icon beyond the stage. Let's talk about what made her so striking. Those blue eyes that seemed to see right through you, the pale skin that looked almost luminous under stage lights, that athletic build from years of fencing practice. But it wasn't just her physical beauty, it was her presence, the way she commanded space. When Le Maupin walked on stage, she didn't just fill her role, she expanded it, made it bigger, more dangerous, more alive. Other actresses performed their parts. Julie inhabited hers completely. Clorinde wasn't just a character Julie played, she was Julie, amplified, the warrior princess who fought for what she believed in, who loved fiercely, who refused to be contained by anyone's expectations. Every time Julie switched between feminine grace and masculine power on stage, the audience was watching her real-life philosophy in action. She'd proven you could be soft and hard, elegant and fierce, feminine and masculine, sometimes all in the same scene. Chlorinde gave her permission to show every facet of who she was. This was revolutionary stuff. We're talking about 1702 France, where women had clearly defined roles. But here's La Maupin, night after night, showing audiences something different. A woman who could be a warrior, who could command armies and still be beautiful, who could love passionately and fight fiercely. The opera became a sensation, partly because it challenged everything people thought they knew about what women could be. Julie wasn't just entertaining people, she was expanding their imagination about possibility. Her on-stage contributions went far beyond just singing the notes. Julie brought authenticity to every sword fight, every battle scene. When Chlorinde drew her blade, you believed she could actually kill you with it. Because she could. Other opera singers had to fake the warrior parts. Julie just had to be herself. She worked with camera to adjust scenes, suggesting changes based on actual combat experience. The result? Fight scenes that looked real because they were real, performed by someone who'd actually bled for her art. Offstage, Julie was transforming opera culture itself. She mentored younger performers, teaching them not just vocal technique, but stage presence, how to own your space, how to make an entrance that stops conversations. Her dressing room became a salon where artists, writers, and intellectuals gathered. She was creating a community around the opera that went beyond just entertainment, making it a place where ideas could be dangerous, where art could challenge society, where performers could be more than just pretty voices in costume. Tancred ran for years, but Julie's influence lasted decades. She'd proven that opera could be a vehicle for social change, that a single performer could shift cultural attitudes. Every time a woman took the stage after her and commanded that space with confidence, they were walking in La Maupin's footsteps. She'd shown them it was possible to be both powerful and feminine, both artist and warrior. That combination would echo through French theatre for generations. Some spells once cast never really end. The soothing echo of love. By 1703, Julie's voice echoed through every grand salon in Paris. The opera had made her famous, but fame brought complications. After each performance, nobles waited backstage with flowers, invitations, proposals. She brushed past them all. Then one evening, watching from the royal box, sat a woman whose beauty stopped conversations mid-sentence. Madame la Marquise de Florensac. Even Julie, who feared nothing, felt her breath catch when their eyes met across the theatre. Everyone knew the Marquise. Painters begged to capture her face. Poets wrote verses about her smile. She was married, of course, to a much older Marquise, who spent his time hunting and drinking wine. The marriage was business. Her heart, that remained her own secret. Until the night she sent her footman backstage with a simple note, "Your Isabel moved me to tears. Would you join me for supper?" Julie read it twice, then looked up at the royal box. The Marquise was gone. They met 3 days later at a small restaurant near the Seine. Julie arrived in her usual men's clothing, sword at her side. The Marquise wore silk the colour of deep ocean water. They talked for hours about music, about books, about the absurd restrictions placed on women. The Marquise had been educated secretly by tutors who believed intelligence had no gender. By midnight, they were walking along the river, talking like old friends. By dawn, they were something else entirely. What started as admiration became fascination. Fascination became desire. The Marquise would attend every performance, sitting in the same box, watching Julie with an intensity that made other audience members uncomfortable. After each show, they'd meet at different locations around Paris. Coffee houses where philosophers argued, gardens where they could walk without curious eyes. Julie had loved before, but this felt different, deeper, like coming home to a place she'd never known she was searching for. Within 6 months, they were living together openly in the Marquise's townhouse near the Louvre. Her husband rarely visited Paris, preferring his country estates. Julie moved her few possessions from her modest rooms near the opera house. They hosted salons where writers, musicians, and free-thinking nobles gathered to discuss ideas that would never be spoken at court. These evenings became legendary. Wit flowed like wine, and at the centre, 2 women who had found their perfect match. Paris society didn't know what to make of them. Some whispered scandal behind fans. Others found their relationship oddly romantic. The fact that Julie dressed as a man complicated things. Were they lovers, friends, something in between? King Louis XIV, who had pardoned Julie twice already, seemed amused by the whole arrangement. As long as they remained discreet at court functions, he looked the other way. Even kings, apparently, could recognize true love when they saw it. Their days followed a comfortable rhythm, mornings in bed, reading to each other from new books smuggled in from England or Italy. Julie would practice scales while the Marquise painted watercolours by the tall windows. Afternoons brought visitors or walks through Paris markets, buying flowers or fabrics that caught their fancy. Evenings belonged to the opera or their salon. They were partners in everything: business decisions, artistic choices, even Julie's occasional urges to challenge someone to a duel. The Marquise understood Julie's need for freedom, like no one else had. When Julie wanted to fence with the guards at the Louvre, the Marquise packed lunch and came to watch. When Julie considered a risky new opera role, the Marquise read the libretto and offered honest feedback. In return, Julie encouraged the Marquise's intellectual pursuits. She bought books on mathematics and philosophy, subjects most women weren't supposed to study. Together, they carved out space for their authentic selves in a world that demanded conformity. What amazed people was how they balanced each other. Julie was fire and motion, quick to anger, quicker to forgive. The Marquise was steady water, thoughtful, patient, wise. When Julie stormed home after an argument with a director, the Marquise would listen without judgment, then help her plan a solution. When the Marquise felt trapped by social expectations, Julie would suggest they escape to the countryside for a few days. They were opposites who made perfect sense together. By 1705, subtle changes crept into their perfect world. The Marquise tired more easily during their walks. Sometimes she'd develop sudden fevers that lasted for days. Julie, who could face down 3 swordsmen without flinching, found herself paralyzed by the sight of her lover's pale face against white pillows. The best doctors in Paris couldn't explain what was wrong. They prescribed rest, bloodletting, herbal remedies. Nothing helped. The Marquise grew weaker, while Julie grew more desperate and afraid. July 2nd, 1705. The fever finally won. Julie held the Marquise's hand as her breathing grew shallow, then stopped entirely. The most beautiful woman in France was gone at 28. Julie sat beside the bed for hours, unable to accept what had happened. 2 years of perfect love ended in a single moment. She'd survived duels, fires, exile, scandal. But this broke something in her that never healed. 3 days later, she sent word to the opera La Maupin was retiring, forever. The final curtain call. May 1705. The opera house in Paris is buzzing with excitement. Julie d'Aubigny takes the stage as Isabelle in La Venetienne. The audience doesn't know this will be her final performance. They don't know that backstage, her beloved Madame la Marquise de Florensac is burning with fever. Julie sings her heart out, but her mind is elsewhere, on the woman waiting for her at home. The woman who had become her entire world. The most beautiful woman in France, they called her, and she was dying. For 2 years, Julie and the Marquise had lived together openly. Contemporary accounts say they dwelt in such perfect affection that Paris society barely knew what to make of it. Here was Maupin, the notorious duelist and opera star, completely devoted to one woman. No more scandals, no more sword fights in royal gardens. Just love. Pure, simple, overwhelming love. The kind that makes you forget the rest of the world exists. The kind that makes you believe nothing bad can ever happen. But the fever wouldn't break. Julie watched helplessly as the woman she adored grew weaker each day. This was different from any enemy she'd ever faced. You can't challenge death to a duel. You can't seduce it with a song. All those years of being unstoppable, of bending the world to her will, and now she was powerless. The doctors came and went. Bloodletting, herbs, prayers. Nothing worked. The marquise slipped away piece by piece, and Julie could only hold her hand and watch. July 2nd, 1705. The Marquise de Florensac drew her last breath in Julie's arms. The most celebrated opera singer in France, the woman who had faced down 3 noblemen in a single night, completely fell apart. She who had burned down a convent for love now couldn't even light a candle without her hands shaking. The funeral was a grand affair. All of Paris society came to pay their respects. Julie stood there like a statue, watching them lower her heart into the ground. The opera house tried to coax her back. New roles were written for her voice. Composers begged her to return. But Julie was done. She'd sung her last note, fought her last duel, loved her last love. Without the Marquise, the stage felt empty. The applause felt hollow. Even her own voice sounded like a stranger's. She walked away from everything that had made her famous. The woman who had never retreated from anything finally surrendered to grief. This time, when Julie entered a convent, it wasn't part of some elaborate scheme. No fires, no kidnapping plots, no escape plans. She simply wanted silence, wanted to disappear into the kind of quiet she'd never known in her 32 years of living out loud. The nuns at the convent knew who she was, Maupin, the infamous opera star, but they welcomed her anyway. Maybe they saw something in her broken eyes that reminded them why they'd chosen God over the world. Inside those stone walls, Julie found a different kind of peace. No audiences to thrill, no critics to charm, no duels to fight, just prayer and silence, and the slow, steady rhythm of convent life. She who had lived like a comet, blazing across the sky of 17th century France, finally learned to be still. The other nuns said she spent hours in the chapel, not praying exactly, but just sitting, remembering, letting her heart slowly piece itself back together. But even in retreat, Julie couldn't escape who she was. Stories about Maupin continued to spread through Paris. New legends built on old ones. Some said she'd become a saint. Others claimed she was plotting another dramatic return. The truth was simpler and sadder. She was just a woman learning how to live with loss. Learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're broken. Sometimes the greatest performance is refusing to perform at all. 1707 arrived quietly. Julie had been in the convent for nearly 2 years when her own body began to fail her. The same fever that had taken her beloved Marquise now claimed Julie herself. She was 33 years old. In those 33 years, she'd lived enough for 10 lifetimes, sword fights and opera stages, burning convents and royal pardons, great loves and greater scandals. She'd been everything 17th century France said a woman couldn't be, and she'd done it all on her own terms. As the fever took hold, did she think about that first duel? About the night she kissed a woman at the royal palace? About the applause that used to shake the opera house rafters? Maybe, or maybe she just thought about the Marquise's smile, about those 2 perfect years when the whole world made sense. Death came for Julie d'Aubigny, the same way everything else had, dramatically, unexpectedly, and far too soon. The woman who had cheated death a dozen times finally let it catch her, and so ends the story of Maupin. Born in an age that tried to cage women, she broke every bar and flew free. She loved fiercely, fought fearlessly, and sang like the very angels envied her voice. She proved that rules were just suggestions, and that one person, living authentically, could change the world's idea of what was possible. Julie d'Aubigny burned bright and fast, like a shooting star, and like all the best stars, she left us wondering what impossible thing she might do next, if only she'd had more time. Echoing through eternity. Picture this. It's 1750, then 1780, then 1800. Julie's been gone for decades now. The opera houses still echo with music, but her voice? That's just a memory whispered between aging musicians. Her dueling scandals become tavern stories. Her convent fire becomes local legend. France moves on. Kings fall. Revolutions rage. And slowly, inevitably, Julie d'Aubigny starts to fade, like smoke from that burning convent, dissipating into the night air until barely anything remains. By the 1820s, she's mostly forgotten, a footnote in opera history, a weird story old people tell about the strange woman who dressed like a man and fought duels. Most of the records are gathering dust in church archives or royal libraries. Her name appears in scattered memoirs, usually misspelled. The world has moved on to new scandals, new heroes, new stories. Julie d'Aubigny is becoming a ghost. But here's the thing about extraordinary people. They don't stay buried forever. Enter Théophile Gautier, French writer, poet, art critic. It's the 1830s, and he's digging through old documents, looking for inspiration. Then he stumbles across these fragments. A woman who burned down a convent, fought duels with noblemen, seduced half the court, sang like an angel. Wait, this actually happened. Gautier can barely believe what he's reading. This isn't fiction, this is history, and it's absolutely insane. He starts taking notes. This woman needs a story. 1835. Gautier publishes Mademoiselle de Maupin. It's loosely based on Julie's life, but he's made some changes. Toned down the violence, added romance, made her more palatable for Victorian sensibilities. Even watered down, the novel is explosive. A woman who lives by her own rules, who loves who she wants, who refuses to be contained by society's expectations. The book hits like lightning. Critics are scandalized. Readers are fascinated. The moral guardians are absolutely losing their minds. And here's where it gets interesting. The censors start banning it. England bans it. America bans it. Several German states ban it. The Catholic Church puts it on the Index of Forbidden Books. Why? Because Gautier's Julie represents something dangerous. Sexual freedom, gender fluidity, the idea that women don't have to live within the lines society draws for them. Even fictional Julie is too much for the 19th century to handle, which of course just makes more people want to read it. Underground copies circulate. People whisper about this incredible character. Literary salons debate her morality. Progressive thinkers champion her as a symbol of liberation. Conservative voices condemn her as everything wrong with modern literature. And slowly, people start asking, wait, was this woman real? They dig into archives, research old opera records, track down court documents, and they discover something amazing. Gautier didn't make her up. He actually toned her down. The real Julie was even more extraordinary. The novel triggers a wave of scholarship. Historians start piecing together Julie's actual story. They find opera reviews praising her voice, court records of her pardons, police reports about her duels, convent records documenting that infamous fire. Each discovery makes her more real, more incredible. Literary critics start comparing Gautier's version to the historical facts. The consensus: reality was stranger than fiction. Julie d'Aubigny had lived a life so extraordinary that even her fictionalized version seemed impossible. By the 1850s, Julie's having a full cultural renaissance. French intellectuals claim her as a national treasure. Early feminists point to her as proof that women have always fought for freedom. Opera companies start reviving works she performed. Artists paint romanticized portraits of her duels and performances. Writers reference her in essays about gender and society. She becomes a symbol. But what kind of symbol? That depends on who's looking. Revolutionary or libertine, pioneer or cautionary tale, hero or villain. The reactions split predictably. Progressive thinkers see her as ahead of her time. Conservative voices see her as a warning about what happens when women abandon their proper roles. Religious leaders condemn her lifestyle. Artists celebrate her authenticity. Social reformers use her story to argue for women's education. Moral crusaders use the same story to argue for stricter social controls. Julie d'Aubigny becomes whatever people need her to be, a mirror reflecting society's anxieties about gender, sexuality, and freedom. But here's what's really fascinating. The more scholars research her, the more modern she seems. Gender fluidity. She lived it. Sexual liberation. She embodied it. Individual freedom over social conformity. She chose it every time. Professional ambition. She conquered opera. Physical courage. She fought duels. Personal authenticity. She never pretended to be anything other than exactly who she was. By the 1860s, people are starting to realize something. Julie d'Aubigny wasn't just unusual for her time, she was unusual for any time, and so her legacy crystallizes. Not just as a historical curiosity, but as a symbol of human possibility. Proof that even in the most restrictive societies, some people find ways to live free. Her story spreads beyond France, beyond literature, beyond academic circles. She becomes myth, legend, inspiration. A woman who refused to be contained by any box society tried to put her in. 2 centuries later, we're still telling her story, still amazed by her courage, still inspired by her refusal to compromise. Julie d'Aubigny echoes through eternity, the torchbearer of unconventional mortality. Here's what happened after Julie died. Something strange, something beautiful. Her story didn't end, it transformed. In death, she became something she never was in life. A symbol, an icon, a rallying cry for people who'd never even heard her sing. See, Julie lived as an individual. Messy, complicated, sometimes violent. But history turned her into something bigger. A beacon for anyone who ever felt trapped by society's rules about who they could love, how they could dress, what they could become. Think about it. 1700 France. Women were property. Homosexuality could get you executed. Cross-dressing was illegal. Julie broke every single one of these rules and got away with it. Twice pardoned by the Sun King himself. That's not just rebellion, that's revolution. And when word of her life spread beyond France, beyond her era, people started to see something revolutionary in her story. Not just what she did, but what she represented. The possibility that the rules everyone said were absolute weren't. By the 1800s, writers were already reshaping her legend. Théophile Gautier's novel made her famous across Europe. Though he actually toned down the real story, Oscar Wilde referenced her. George Sand drew inspiration from her cross-dressing escapades. These weren't just literary curiosities. They were coded messages. Ways of saying, look, there was someone who lived differently and survived. Someone who loved differently and thrived. Someone who proved it was possible to be authentically yourself, even when the world said no. The 20th century, that's when Julie really came alive again. LGBTQ+ historians started digging deeper, looking past the sensationalized versions to find the real woman. What they found was even more remarkable than the myths. Here was someone who'd lived openly with female lovers in an era when that meant death. Someone who'd challenged gender norms centuries before anyone had words for gender fluidity. Someone who'd refused to choose between different aspects of her identity. She was a warrior and a lover, feminine and masculine, violent and tender. Modern queer communities didn't just discover Julie, they recognized her. Here was someone who understood that love doesn't fit into neat categories. Someone who knew that identity is fluid, complex, multifaceted. She loved men and women, sometimes at the same time. She dressed as a man when it suited her purposes, as a woman when she felt like it. She fought like a soldier, sang like an angel, loved like a poet. She was all of these things simultaneously, refusing to be limited by society's need to categorize. But here's what makes Julie's legacy particularly powerful. She wasn't trying to be a symbol, she was just trying to live. That authenticity, that refusal to perform respectability, that's what makes her story so compelling. She never apologized for who she was, never tried to make herself more palatable to society. She burned down a convent for love, killed men who disrespected her, kissed women at royal balls, and when people called her scandalous, she shrugged and kept being herself. That kind of unapologetic self-acceptance is rare in any era. Today, Julie appears in novels, operas, plays, films, but more importantly, she appears in conversations, in pride parades, in discussions about gender expression and sexual freedom. She's become a patron saint of people who refuse to be limited by binary thinking. Bisexual communities claim her. Transgender activists cite her cross-dressing as early gender rebellion. Feminists point to her swordsmanship and independence. She belongs to all of them because she belonged to no single category. Her life was intersectional before we had that word. What's fascinating is how different eras see different aspects of Julie's story. The Romantics loved her passion. Early feminists admired her independence. The gay rights movement embraced her same-sex relationships. Modern activists celebrate her gender fluidity. Each generation finds what they need in her story. That's the mark of a true icon, someone whose life contains enough complexity, enough contradiction, enough humanity, that every era can find themselves reflected in her choices. She was ahead of her time, and somehow perfectly of ours. But Julie's impact goes beyond identity politics. She represents something universal, the courage to live authentically in a world that demands conformity. How many people spend their entire lives hiding who they really are, dimming their light to make others comfortable? Julie never did that. She burned bright and died young, but she lived fully, completely, without apology. That kind of authentic living inspires people regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. It's about having the courage to be yourself. There's something almost mythical about her story now. The opera singer who duelled 3 men and won. The woman who broke into a convent with fire and fraud. The lover who mourned so deeply she walked away from fame. These stories get told and retold, embellished and reimagined, because they represent something people long for: absolute freedom. The freedom to love without limits, to express yourself without fear, to live without seeking permission. Julie didn't ask for that freedom. She simply took it. So Julie Dubigny lives on. Not just in history books, but in the hearts of people who see their own struggles reflected in her story. People who understand that sometimes rules need to be broken, that sometimes love requires rebellion, that sometimes being yourself is a revolutionary act. She torchbearer of unconventional mortality, because she proved that some flames are too bright to be extinguished by death. Some stories are too powerful to stay buried. Some lives are too extraordinary to be forgotten. Good night. The unsung lyricist. Here's what gets me about Julie. Everyone remembers the duels, the convents, the scandals, but they forget she was first and foremost a musician, an artist who could make grown men weep with a single note. While she was busy breaking every social rule imaginable, she was also quietly revolutionizing French opera, creating new vocal ranges, inspiring composers to write roles that had never existed before. Yeah, she burned down buildings and fought with swords, But her real weapon, that voice. When Julie fled to Marseille with Saran, she didn't just hide, she found Pierre Gaultier de Marseille and his opera company. Picture this, a fugitive from justice, walks into an audition and absolutely destroys everyone in the room. Gaultier had heard talented singers before, but Julie wasn't just talented. She had this raw, untrained power that could fill a theatre without amplification. Within weeks, she wasn't just performing, she was the star, the one name on everyone's lips in southern France. Her voice defied every category they had. Not quite soprano, not quite alto, something entirely new. Composers didn't know what to do with her range. It was like she'd invented a new instrument. Deep enough to sing male roles convincingly, high enough to hit notes that made audiences gasp. And that projection, remember, these are theatres with no microphones, just stone walls and wooden stages. Yet Julie could make the back row feel like she was singing directly to them. Pure vocal power mixed with perfect technique. The audiences went absolutely wild for her. Not just because of the voice, though, that was incredible. It was her presence, the way she commanded every inch of the stage. When Julie performed, she wasn't playing a character, she was becoming them. Goddesses, warriors, lovers, victims. Each role transformed her completely. Contemporary reviews describe grown men openly weeping during her performances, women fainting from the emotional intensity. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a religious experience. And Julie, she fed off that energy like fire feeds on oxygen. Composers started writing specifically for her. Think about that, in an era when women barely had creative input. Julie was inspiring entirely new musical compositions. André Campra created Tancred with her voice in mind. He literally invented new vocal arrangements because existing opera couldn't contain what she could do. She wasn't just performing existing works, she was pushing the entire art form forward, creating space for a type of female voice that had never been heard on the operatic stage before. Innovation through pure talent and determination. Here's where it gets wild. Her dueling reputation actually helped her opera career. Audiences came partly for the music, partly hoping for drama. Would La Maupin challenge someone to a sword fight after the show? Would she seduce the lead tenor? The anticipation was electric. Other performers had to rely purely on talent. Julie had talent plus this aura of danger. She was box office gold because you never knew what might happen. The opera house became part theatre, part gladiator arena, part social revolution. Before Julie, female opera singers were decorative. Pretty voices for pretty songs about love and loss. Julie changed everything. She demanded roles with substance, characters with agency. When she played Pallas Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, it wasn't just casting, it was perfect typecasting. She brought authenticity to warrior roles because she actually was one. Suddenly other female performers had permission to be powerful on stage, to take up space, to demand better material. Julie opened doors by kicking them down. Her debut at the Paris Opera in 1690 was legendary. 17 years old, playing Pallas Athena in Cadmus at Hermione. The Marquis d'Anjou, who'd seen every major performance of his era, wrote that hers was the most beautiful voice in the world. Not one of the most beautiful, period. That's not hyperbole from a fan, that's a professional critic who'd heard the best singers of the age. Julie walked onto that stage as a teenager and immediately established herself as the voice of her generation. She worked with the greatest composers of her time as equals, not subordinates. That was unheard of for women. When Jean-Baptiste Lully created roles, Julie had input. When new works were being developed, her voice shaped how they were written. She wasn't just interpreting music, she was helping create it. Building relationships with librettists, suggesting character developments, pushing for more complex female roles. She treated opera like a collaborative art form, when most female singers were expected to just show up and sing what they were told. The ripple effects of her career lasted decades after she retired. Female singers suddenly had permission to be dramatic, powerful, even dangerous on stage. Composers started writing more complex female characters because Julie had proven audiences would embrace them. Opera houses began featuring women as true stars, not just supporting players to male leads. She didn't just break barriers for herself, she created a completely new template for what a female performer could be. Bold, uncompromising, artistically adventurous. The modern opera diva, that archetype starts with La Maupin. When Julie walked away from opera after her lover's death, she left behind a completely transformed art form. The mezzo-soprano range she pioneered became standard. The dramatic intensity she brought to female roles became expected. The idea that opera singers could be larger-than-life personalities that started with her. She proved that musical excellence and personal rebellion weren't contradictory. They could feed each other, create something bigger than either alone. Julie d'Aubigny didn't just sing, she changed how we think about what voices can do. Unveiling the veil. Here's what gets me about Julie d'Aubigny. Everyone knew her as this blazing force of nature, the woman who burned down convents, who fought 3 men at once, who kissed noble women at royal balls. But that was just the surface. Behind all that fire and fury, there was someone who loved so deeply it nearly destroyed her, someone who craved the very thing she seemed to reject, peace. The real Julie wasn't the swaggering opera star. The real Julie was the woman who wept. Think about it. Every night Julie stepped onto that opera stage as a goddess. Literally. She played Pallas Athena, divine warriors, unstoppable forces. The audience saw this towering figure in elaborate costumes, voice soaring through the theatre, commanding every eye. But when those curtains fell, when the makeup came off and the crowds went home, that's when the mask slipped. That's when you could see the woman underneath all that performance. Vulnerable, searching, human in ways that would have shocked her adoring public completely. Then came Madame la Marquise de Florensac, the woman they called the most beautiful in all of France. And for Julie, this wasn't another conquest. This wasn't another scandal to add to her collection. This was love. Real, devastating, change your entire world love. For the first time in her chaotic life, Julie had found someone who saw past the legend, someone who loved not La Maupin, the opera star, but Julie the woman. And that made all the difference in how this story ends. They lived together for 2 years, openly, in perfect affection, according to the court gossips. Can you picture it? Julie, who'd spent years fighting and fleeing and performing, finally had a home, someone to come back to after every show, someone who understood that behind all the bravado was a person who just wanted to be loved. For once, Julie wasn't running from anything. She wasn't proving anything. She was just happy, content in ways she'd never been before. It was everything she'd never known she wanted. The contrast was startling. By day, Julie would stride onto the opera stage, commanding thousands. By evening, she'd return to quiet moments with the Marquise, reading together, talking about everything and nothing. The woman who terrorized half of Paris became gentle, domestic even. She'd found someone worth being soft for, someone who saw the scared child underneath the sword-wielding performer. The great irony? Julie had spent years breaking every rule society imposed on women, only to discover happiness in the one thing society actually wanted: love. May 1705. Julie was performing as Isabelle in La Venetienne. Just another night at the opera. Another crowd to dazzle. But at home, the Marquise was feeling unwell. A fever. Nothing serious at first. You know how these things start. A slight headache. Feeling tired. In that era, fevers came and went. Most people recovered. Julie probably wasn't even worried initially. She'd seen her lover through minor illnesses before. But this time was different. The fever wasn't breaking, it was getting worse. and Julie was starting to panic. July 2nd, 1705. The Marquise de Florensac died. Just like that, the love of Julie's life, gone. Can you imagine? This woman who'd faced down armed men without flinching, who'd set buildings on fire to save her lovers, who seemed utterly fearless, was completely helpless against illness. Death had taken the one person who mattered most. And for the first time in her life, Julie's sword was useless. Her voice couldn't bring anyone back. Her legendary courage meant nothing. She was just broken. Julie's response was immediate and total. She walked away from the opera, just stopped, mid-career. At the height of her fame, she retired immediately and entered a convent. Not as an escape scheme this time, not as part of some elaborate plot. This was genuine retreat. The woman who'd once broken someone out of a convent was now seeking refuge in one. She wanted silence. She wanted prayer. She wanted walls between herself and a world that had suddenly become unbearable. She was seeking the one thing she'd never needed before: sanctuary. Think about that transformation. The performer becomes the hermit. The scandalous celebrity becomes the quiet nun. Julie had spent her entire adult life being watched, talked about, gossiped over. Now she craved invisibility. The voice that had thrilled thousands fell silent. The sword arm that had defeated a dozen men folded in prayer. She'd lost the only person who truly knew her, and without that witness to her private self, what was the point of the public performance? Better to withdraw completely. Better to mourn in peace. In those convent walls, Julie finally had time to think, to process everything she'd been, everything she'd done. All those years of running, fighting, performing, scandalize, it had all led to 2 perfect years of love. And now that love was gone. So who was she without it? Who was Julie d'Aubigny without someone to come home to? Without someone who saw past the legend? The silence must have been deafening for someone used to applause. But maybe that's what she needed. Space to remember who she'd been before the world made her into La Maupin. And here's the thing that breaks my heart about Julie's story. She found peace in the end. After all that chaos, all that violence, all that drama, she found stillness. The convent gave her something the opera never could. Quiet, time to grieve properly, time to honor what she'd lost without performing that grief for an audience. Maybe that's the most human thing about her whole story. Even the most extraordinary people sometimes just need to sit with their sadness. Even legends need time to heal. Even Julie d'Aubigny needed permission to simply stop. Swords and solos. Picture this. You're watching someone at the Paris Opera. Beautiful voice, perfect pitch, hitting notes that make grown men weep. Then later that same night, you see that same person run a sword through someone's shoulder in a duel behind the palace. Same hands. That was Julie d'Aubigny. Most people spend their whole lives trying to master one thing. Julie mastered 2 completely opposite skills, and somehow they worked together perfectly. Here's how she did it. Her father trained her in fencing from childhood, steel in her hand before she could properly hold a fork. But Julie discovered something else. Her voice. Not just any voice. A voice that could fill an opera house, make kings stop their conversations, make audiences forget to breathe. Most women of her era got one or the other. Delicate singing lessons, or, well, nothing violent at all. Julie got both, and she practiced both with the same deadly focus. When she and Saran became travelling performers, that's when the magic really happened. Picture the scene. Julie would start singing, sweet, haunting melodies that drew crowds at village fairs. Then she'd draw her sword and challenge anyone brave enough to face her. She'd literally sing while fighting, taunting her opponents with opera between sword strokes. "You fight like my grandmother," in perfect pitch. The crowds went absolutely wild. They'd never seen anything like it. The surprise was her weapon. No one expected the opera singer to be lethal. No one expected the master swordswoman to hit a perfect high C. She used this constantly. At fancy parties, she'd charm everyone with her voice, then someone would insult her, and suddenly there's a blade at their throat. Did I mention, I also fence? The whiplash was intentional. Julie loved watching people's faces change when they realised who they were dealing with. That night at the royal ball, perfect example. She sang earlier in the evening, everyone swooning over her performance. Then she kissed that noblewoman. 3 men challenged her, and boom, swords in the garden. She fought all 3, won, walked back inside like nothing happened, and probably sang an encore. The same precise control she used for hitting perfect notes. She used it for hitting vital organs. Both required absolute mastery of breath, timing, and grace. Audiences couldn't figure her out. Was she a singer who happened to fence? A killer who happened to sing? The truth was weirder. She was both, completely. When she performed Tancred, playing a warrior who disguised herself as a man, that wasn't acting. That was just Tuesday for Julie. She brought real sword training to operatic roles. She brought operatic drama to real sword fights. The line between performance and life basically disappeared. Think about the contrast. Her voice could express the most delicate emotions. Love, loss, longing, all those subtle feelings that make opera so powerful. But her sword work, pure lethal efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She could go from singing about heartbreak to breaking someone's ribs with the same elegant precision. The same body that created beauty also dealt death, and somehow that made both skills more impressive. She used them strategically too. Her reputation as a singer got her into places where weapons weren't welcome. Palace parties, private salons, opera house rehearsals. Then when someone crossed her, surprise. The singing was her disguise. The sword was her truth. But also the reverse. Her fighting skills protected her singing career. Hard to attack someone on stage when they might challenge you to a duel afterward. Both talents fed each other. The breathing techniques were actually connected. Opera singers need incredible breath control. So do fencers. The timing, the rhythm, the ability to stay calm under pressure. Julie mastered all of this twice. When she was nervous before a performance, she'd practice sword forms. When she was angry before a duel, she'd run vocal exercises. They balanced each other, made her better at both. She found a way to make her contradictions work together. This is what made her legendary. Not just that she could sing, not just that she could fight, but that she could do both at the highest possible level, often in the same night, sometimes in the same hour. She embodied this wild combination of art and violence, beauty and danger, grace and power. People couldn't categorize her, couldn't put her in a box, and that terrified them, which was exactly what Julie wanted. So that was Julie's secret weapon, not just the sword, not just the voice, but the impossible combination. She proved you don't have to choose between different parts of yourself. You can be deadly and beautiful, artistic and violent, refined and dangerous, all at the same time. Most people spend their whole lives trying to fit into one role. Julie decided to master 2 completely opposite ones, and somehow made it look effortless. The Trail of Love. Julie d'Aubigny didn't do anything halfway, including love. Most people in 17th century France followed careful scripts about romance, courtship rules, marriage arrangements, social expectations. Julie, she threw the script out the window and wrote her own. Her heart led her through 3 major relationships that would define her life, each one different, each one dangerous in its own way. From her teenage affair with a powerful older man, to a passionate escape that nearly killed her, to finding the one person who made her want to settle down. It started when she was 14. Her father's boss, the Comte de d'Armagnac, was 40-something, powerful, and completely smitten with his secretary's daughter. Think about the setup here. Julie's father taught sword fighting to court pages. D'Armagnac was his employer. The one man Gaston d'Aubigny couldn't challenge to a duel without losing everything. Julie figured this out fast. She became d'Armagnac's mistress, basically making herself untouchable. Smart move for a teenage girl in a world where women had zero protection. But d'Armagnac soon realized he'd bitten off more than he could chew. Julie was too much, too wild, too independent, too everything. D'Armagnac's solution? Get her married off to someone else. Enter Sieur de Maupin, a mild-mannered clerk who probably thought he was getting a nice, quiet wife. Poor guy had no idea what he was signing up for. The wedding happened in 1687. The very next morning, some sources say literally the day after the ceremony, her new husband was shipped off to southern France for work. Julie kept his name and his money. He kept his distance. Smart man. That's when Saran entered the picture. He was an assistant fencing master, skilled with a blade, probably around Julie's age, definitely more her speed than either of her previous men. They trained together, fought together, and slept together. But Saran had a problem. He'd killed someone in an illegal duel. The police were closing in. Paris was getting dangerous for both of them. So what did they do? They ran, together, south through the French countryside, reinventing themselves as travelling performers, two kids with swords and a death wish. Their travelling show was something else. Julie would sing, draw a crowd, then challenge random men to duels. She'd defeat them one by one, singing little songs about how pathetic they were as she disarmed each challenger. Pure theatre. Pure Julie. When one drunk spectator claimed she must be a man because women couldn't fight like that, her response was direct. She tore off her shirt, proved her point. The heckler shut up. But this relationship, it wasn't built to last. Saran was running from his past. Julie was running toward her future. In Marseille, everything changed. Julie joined the local opera company, started performing again. Her voice was extraordinary, her presence magnetic. But then she met someone, a young woman, daughter of a local merchant, and for the first time in Julie's life, she fell completely, desperately in love. Not lust, not convenience, not strategy. Love. The kind that makes you forget everything else exists. The kind that makes you do incredibly stupid, incredibly brave things. The merchant's family took one look at this situation and panicked. Their solution? Send their daughter to a convent in Avignon. Bad move. You don't separate Julie d'Aubigny from someone she loves and expect her to just accept it. She followed her girlfriend to Avignon, entered the convent herself, posing as someone taking holy orders. Inside those walls, they resumed their relationship, but eventually, Julie needed an exit strategy. When an elderly nun died naturally, Julie saw her chance. Middle of the night, she and her lover stole the dead body, put it in the young woman's bed, set the room on fire, and escaped in the chaos. The perfect crime, except it wasn't. Authorities figured out the body swap pretty quickly. Julie was charged with kidnapping, body snatching, arson, and failing to appear in court. The judges sentenced her to death by burning, but here's the weird part. They couldn't quite wrap their minds around a woman abducting another woman from a convent, so they sentenced her under her husband's male title. Sieur de Maupin was condemned to death. As a man, Julie was now a fugitive with a death sentence. But love makes you do crazy things. She regrets nothing. While maybe getting caught, on the run again, Julie had various affairs. She accidentally duelled the Comte d'Albert when he challenged what he thought was a young man to a fight. She won, wounded him, then nursed him back to health and seduced him. They became lifelong friends. There were others. Singers, nobles, random encounters. Julie collected lovers, like some people collect books, but none of them stuck. None of them mattered the way that first real love had mattered. She was performing at the Paris Opera by then, famous again, pardoned by the king, but something was missing. Then, in 1703, Julie met Madame la Marquise de Florensac. Contemporary accounts called the Marquise the most beautiful woman in France. But for Julie, it was more than beauty, it was connection, peace. For the first time in her chaotic life, Julie wanted to settle down. They lived together openly for 2 years. No hiding, no running, no drama, just happiness. Witnesses described their relationship as perfect affection. Julie had found someone who could match her intelligence, her passion, her spirit, without requiring her to dim any part of herself. For once, she didn't have to choose between love and freedom. It ended the way the best love stories do. Tragically, in July 1705, the Marquise de Florensac fell ill with fever and died. Julie was performing her last role when it happened. The woman who'd burned down a convent for love, who'd duelled 3 men outside a royal palace, who'd never backed down from anything, was broken. She retired from opera immediately, sought refuge in a convent, this time willingly. 2 years later, Julie herself was dead, 33 years old. She'd loved boldly, fought fiercely, and when her heart broke, she simply, a rebel, a muse. When Julie d'Aubigny died in 1707, she left behind more than just scandalous stories. She left behind a legend that refused to stay buried. Within decades, writers were already spinning her life into fiction. But here's the thing, they kept having to tone down the real story, because nobody would believe it. A woman who burned down a convent, who duelled 3 men at a royal ball, who seduced half of Paris while singing opera. Even fiction has limits. Julie didn't. In 1835, Théophile Gautier wrote Mademoiselle de Maupin, loosely based on Julie's life. But Gautier had to change almost everything. He made her less violent, less shocking, more digestible. Even then, the novel was so scandalous, it got banned across Europe and America. Think about that. Gautier watered down her actual life story, and it was still too much for 19th century society. The real Julie would have laughed at that, probably while challenging the censors to a duel. But banning Gautier's novel just made people more curious. Underground copies spread across Europe. Writers, artists, musicians, they all became obsessed with this mysterious woman who'd somehow lived outside every rule society had ever made. Her story became a kind of secret password among rebels and free thinkers. Each generation discovered her again and thought they were the first to understand her power. They weren't wrong, they were just late to the party by a few centuries. Victorian writers were fascinated by her because she represented everything they couldn't say out loud. Here was a woman who loved other women openly, who fought men and won, who took what she wanted without asking permission. She became a coded symbol in literature, the dangerous woman who lived by her own rules. Authors would reference her in knowing winks to readers who understood. She was rebellion personified, dressed in men's clothes and carrying a sword. Composers kept writing music inspired by her voice, her story, her sheer audacity. Remember, she literally changed opera by pioneering new vocal ranges. But beyond technique, she represented something revolutionary, the idea that art could be dangerous, that a performer could be more than just entertainment. She could be revolution itself. Modern opera singers still study her techniques, but more importantly, they study her fearlessness, the way she owned every stage she stepped onto. When cinema arrived, Julie's story was perfect for the screen. Swashbuckling romance, sword fights, forbidden love, dramatic escapes. She had everything directors craved. Dozens of films have attempted to capture her story, though most focus on the romance and adventure, while skipping the parts where she kills people. Hollywood loves a rebel, but apparently prefers them with less actual violence. Julie would have been amused, and probably disappointed by the sword choreography. Today, she's become an icon in LGBTQ+ communities worldwide. Here was a woman living openly with female lovers 3 centuries before Stonewall. She didn't hide, didn't apologize, didn't tone herself down for anyone's comfort. Pride parades feature her image. Queer bookstores sell her biography. She's proof that people like us have always existed, have always fought, have always loved boldly. She's not just history, she's hope with a sword. What's remarkable is how her story keeps challenging each new generation's ideas about gender. 17th century audiences were scandalized by her cross-dressing. 19th century readers were fascinated by her independence. 20th century feminists claimed her as a pioneer. 21st century audiences see her as gender fluid before the term existed. She somehow stays ahead of every age that discovers her, like she's still teaching us lessons we're not quite ready to learn yet. Of course, there's a danger in how we remember her. It's easy to romanticize violence when it's 3 centuries old. Easy to forget that dueling actually meant potentially killing someone, that her escapes left real people hurt or dead. Modern retellings sometimes turn her into a fantasy character, all adventure and romance with the sharp edges filed off. But Julie wasn't a fairy tale. She was a real person making real choices with real consequences. That's what made her extraordinary. She's influenced everyone from punk rockers to feminist scholars to drag kings. Her story asks uncomfortable questions. What if women just refused to follow the rules? What if they fought back physically, not just politically? What if they loved who they wanted, dressed how they wanted, lived as they wanted? She's become a symbol of radical self-determination. The idea that you can remake yourself completely if you're brave enough to pay the price. So why does Julie d'Aubigny endure? Maybe because she represents something we all secretly want, the courage to live completely authentically. Consequences be damned. She burned down a convent for love. She fought noblemen at royal balls. She sang before kings and loved without shame. She lived 33 years as herself, fully and fiercely, in a world that still asks us to shrink ourselves, to be smaller, quieter, safer. Julie d'Aubigny whispers from across 3 centuries, be magnificent instead, into the age of enlightenment. Picture this. Julie d'Aubigny died in 1707, but her spirit, that was just getting started. See, while she was busy burning down convents and fighting duels, something bigger was happening. The rigid world she'd been smashing against her whole life, it was starting to crack. The age of enlightenment was coming, and Julie, she was like the first lightning strike before the storm. Her life had become a blueprint for everything that movement would stand for. Think about what she did to gender roles. In 1673, women were property. They couldn't own land, couldn't choose their husbands, couldn't speak in public. Julie looked at all that and said, nope. She wore men's clothes to court balls, kissed women in front of royalty, fought duels like any nobleman. She didn't just break the rules, she acted like they didn't exist. And people watched. They saw a woman living as an equal, and suddenly equality didn't seem so impossible. The church held absolute power over people's lives, especially women's lives. Convents were prisons disguised as holy places. Families used them to control their daughters. Julie saw that system and torched it, literally. When they locked away her lover, she didn't petition or pray. She posed as a nun, stole a corpse, and burned the place down. That's not just rebellion. That's someone who understood that corrupt institutions only respond to force. In the opera world, she revolutionized what art could be. Before Julie, female roles were written by men for men's fantasies. Helpless princesses, suffering saints, Julie demanded roles with power. Goddesses, warriors, women who fought and won. Composers started writing specifically for her voice, her range, her presence. She proved that audiences wanted authentic female stories, not just pretty decorations. Art became a weapon for change in her hands. But here's what really made her dangerous to the old world. She lived authentically. No masks, no pretending. She loved who she wanted, fought who challenged her, dressed how she pleased. In a society built on fake politeness and hidden desires, Julie was blazing honesty. She showed people what it looked like to be completely unapologetically yourself. And once you see that kind of freedom, you can't unsee it. You start wanting it for yourself. Her influence spread in ways she probably never imagined. That young count she stabbed and then seduced, he became a lifelong advocate for women's education. The noble women who watched her kiss another woman at court, some started questioning their own arranged marriages. The working class people who saw her street performances, they realized that a peasant's daughter could become an opera star. She planted seeds of possibility everywhere she went. Love was her ultimate rebellion. In 1700, marriage was business. Love was luxury. Same-sex relationships were criminal. Julie loved openly, passionately, without apology. Her relationship with Madame de Florensac wasn't hidden or shameful. They lived together as partners. People saw that love could exist outside marriage, outside church approval, outside social rules. Love as a natural right, not a privilege granted by institutions. Revolutionary thinking. The barriers she smashed stayed broken. After Julie proved women could excel at swordplay, other women started training. After she showed female opera singers could play powerful roles, composers wrote more complex female characters. After she lived openly with her female lover, other same-sex couples became slightly less careful about hiding. She created cracks in the wall that others could widen. Her audacity gave permission to others' dreams. Everything the Enlightenment would champion, Julie embodied decades early. Reason over tradition. She used logic to expose the stupidity of gender restrictions. Individual rights over collective conformity. Her whole life was one long declaration of personal freedom. Equality over hierarchy. She treated kings and commoners exactly the same. Knowledge over ignorance. She educated herself in subjects forbidden to women. She was Enlightenment principles walking around in sword fighting, opera singing human form. By the time Voltaire and Rousseau started writing about human dignity and natural rights, Julie's life had already demonstrated those concepts. She proved that individual merit mattered more than birth circumstances, that talent transcended gender, that love deserved respect regardless of its object, that challenging corrupt power wasn't just acceptable, it was necessary. The philosophers would write the theories. Julie had lived them. Her biography was their proof of concept. So yeah, Julie d'Aubigny died young. But her influence lived on. Every woman who refused an unwanted marriage, every artist who demanded creative control, every person who chose love over convention, they were following paths she'd carved with her sword and her voice. She didn't just survive in a hostile world, she changed it, made it a little more possible for everyone else to be themselves. That's Enlightenment in action. Sweet dreams, rebels. Shattering shackles, embracing freedom. We followed Julie d'Aubigny through sword fights, love affairs, and burning convents. But here's what gets me about her story. It's not just about one rebellious woman in 17th century France. It's about what happens when someone decides the rules don't apply to them, when they choose authenticity over acceptance. Julie didn't just break a few social conventions, she obliterated them. And somehow, in a world designed to crush women like her, she thrived. Think about what she accomplished. Born into a society where women were property, she became a master swordswoman. In an era where homosexuality could get you executed, she loved women openly. When opera demanded conformity, she created new vocal ranges. Every single thing about her existence defied what was considered possible. She lived as if the word impossible meant nothing. And maybe that's the most remarkable part. She made it look effortless. Remember that convent escape, stealing a dead nun's body, setting fire to a religious house, fleeing into the night with her lover? This wasn't just a dramatic rescue. It was Julie saying the loudest possible no to a world trying to separate her from what she loved. They tried to use God's house to cage her happiness, so she burned it down, literally. That takes a special kind of fearlessness, the kind that changes how you see what's actually possible. Her opera career proves something fascinating about talent and authenticity. She didn't just sing existing roles, composers wrote new parts specifically for her voice. She pioneered an entirely new vocal range. Picture that for a second. The musical establishment looked at this sword-fighting, cross-dressing rebel and said, "We need to create something new, because nothing we have captures what she can do." That's what happens when authentic talent meets an industry ready to evolve. That royal ball duel, kissing a woman in front of King Louis XIV, then fighting 3 noblemen in the palace gardens. It's almost cartoon levels of audacity. But here's what's brilliant about it. When the king confronted her about illegal dueling, she'd technically broken no law. Dueling was forbidden to men. She was a woman. Legal loophole through sheer authenticity. She turned being herself into actual armour. That's next level problem solving right there. Her relationship with the Marquise de Florensac shows us something different about Julie. For 2 years, she lived quietly. No scandals, no duels, no burning buildings, just love. Contemporary accounts say they lived in perfect affection. After all that chaos and rebellion, she found peace. Not by changing who she was, but by finding someone who loved exactly who she was. That might be the most subversive thing she ever did, being genuinely happy. When the Marquise died, Julie's response tells us everything about how deeply she felt things. This woman who'd fought kingdoms for love, she just walked away. Retired from opera at the height of her fame, entered a convent willingly this time, seeking silence after a lifetime of noise. Even her grief was authentic, uncompromising. She loved completely, and when that love ended, she mourned completely. No halfway measures, ever. Julie died at 33, younger than most people watching Netflix, but she'd lived more authentically in those years than most people manage in a century. No regrets, no apologies, no time wasted pretending to be someone else. When writers tried to capture her story later, they had to tone it down. Reality was too wild for fiction. That's what a life lived on your own terms looks like, too big for other people's imagination. Here's what Julie d'Aubigny actually represents. Proof that you can be exactly who you are, even when the entire world disagrees. She didn't negotiate with society about her identity. She didn't compromise on her passions. She didn't dim her light to make other people comfortable. She existed loudly and completely, and somehow, impossibly, the world bent around her instead of breaking her. That's the power of absolute authenticity. It's literally revolutionary. Le Maupin's story resonates today because we still struggle with the same questions. How much of yourself do you sacrifice for acceptance? When do you stop asking permission to exist? Julie never asked permission for anything. She loved who she loved, fought who she challenged her, sang what moved her. In a world obsessed with fitting in, she chose to stand out, completely, unapologetically, magnificently. That choice is still available to all of us. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, remember this extraordinary woman who refused to be anything less than herself. Julie d'Aubigny, Le Maupin, the opera star who burned down a convent, killed 10 men, and loved without limits. She lived like freedom was her birthright. Maybe that's the greatest lesson she left us, that authenticity isn't a luxury, it's a choice. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining us on this journey through her remarkable life.